Hello, everyone. Well, let's go. Oh, that's fine. Hey, everyone. Finally fixed the stream settings. So, welcome to the first 1080p lecture for COMP1531. For anyone who's curious, all the settings were 100% correct. And then right as I clicked to go live, there's an automatically checked box that says use optimized settings, which just disregards all the settings I had been setting and then like was trying to pick some automated optimized settings. So that's why, yeah, that's why it wasn't working. But it should be fixed now. So hopefully it doesn't look, hopefully my internet can keep up, I guess. But, so there we go. Okay. Let's just clean this up a bit. Welcome to week 4, lecture 2. Yeah, please don't ask me now for 4K streams. Don't push your luck. My internet can only do as well as it can do. So, yeah, welcome to 4.3 or lecture 4, week 4, lecture 2. We're talking about API testing today. So all the HTTP stuff we spoke about yesterday, basically all we're going to talk about today is how to wrap that with PyTest. So it's a much more palatable lecture today. We have a lot of time to talk about it, so we have some time to sort of breathe and stretch and ask questions and clarify things from yesterday. So it should be a really good lecture. I don't even expect this to take the full hour. You guys are making me laugh with the lecture stuff, but yeah, I don't even think we're going to need to take the full hour today. So we have some chance to breathe today. So I'm really looking forward to it. And I really don't even have any slides. Basically, all I'm going to do is a demo showing off how we can use PyTest to black box test the HTTP APIs that we've written for the project and in the demo, the Heroes demo we did yesterday. So this is a very common way of doing HTTP testing. This is actually the primary way that we do HTTP testing or unit testing in general with the system that I build. Basically 90% of all of our tests are HTTP tests. So this is where we draw the line in the black box, so to speak. So it's a really useful approach. And all we're going to really do is take the Heroes API that we built yesterday, the really basic things, and wrap it in some tests. So that's all I've got for the actual slides. Like always, the slides are up on the GitLab, and there's some notes version of the slides as well. Now, before we get into the lecture today, someone in the lecture feedback form yesterday, or this morning or something, asked how we can do HTTP querying. So we used Postman in the lecture yesterday, but how we can do that on VLAB. And it's a really good point because I didn't talk about it. I didn't show it. So it's really easy, thankfully. So all I'm going to show now is how we can do this. So I posted this on the forum, actually. Let me get a link to that. But there's my pinned post. I'll post that in chat. This is for anyone who wants to use Postman on VLAB. I found the best way is just to install the Postman Chrome add-on. So I've already installed, you just go to this URL in Chrome on VLAB, you click install, you click launch. It brings up this little Chromium app, but it's just running sort of, let's get rid of this. It's just running. And then it's just basically exactly the same as what I showed you yesterday. So it's a really nice approach because you don't have to install anything natively on the VLAB system, but you get the full same user interface as you do with the local version, and it just works. And so here I cloned oops, I'm just trying to make this a bit bigger. Go away. Here I cloned the lecture code that we wrote yesterday. You can see it's the exact same code. I ran it. It's running on localhost on port 20,000. So I can just plug that in here. I click send and I get back my response. And everything that we spoke about yesterday with Postman and everything that I'll talk about it today will just work. So if you prefer to use VLAB, you can go ahead and just use this handy Chrome extension. They have marked it as deprecated, so I don't know how long it'll work for, but for now it'll be good enough. So there's that. Any other questions? But otherwise, everything else that we speak about works just the same in VLAB. All right, I'm going to close VLAB. So just if there are any VLAB related questions, now's the time to ask it, because then I'm just going to quit out of it. Okay, and then assume then that we are all good with that. I'll just minimize it, that's fine. And then I'm gonna even just close these slides. We don't need these. Okay. So I went back through the heroes code that we wrote yesterday, or we looked at yesterday, and I made a few small modifications to it, but the spirit of it is exactly the same. So at first, before we go into the testing, I want to take you through what I changed so that you have your head around it, and also to act as a bit of a recap for what we did yesterday, because I know yesterday we powered through a lot of new concepts. So it's good today to, just 24 hours later, if you're watching the lectures live or however you're watching these, to get a really quick recap into what we've built and the different ways that we can write HTTP endpoints and interact with them via Flask. So the big thing I changed, so nothing changed here. We can, delete a specific hero. So the big thing I wanted to recap, because I realized I only spoke a little bit about it at the end, and I want to support you guys with the project. So there's two ways to send information to a HTTP endpoint. One of them is a query parameter, and one of them is the JSON in the body of the request. And so I wanted to show the different ways that we can support that. So here we have a GET request. Now, it might give me some errors because I've got duplicate functions, but that's okay. Here I've got a GET request, and what I've actually said is that with this GET request, so this endpoint is /heroes and then / some name placeholder. What I'm indicating here is that in the actual URL, the actual query to hit this endpoint, I expect people to give me a / and then a name. So it's like I expect someone to go like, localhost or 172.0.1, some port / heroes / Superman. This is the URL I expect people to be writing. And if I know that I want this placeholder to be in place in the URL query, then I can actually tell Flask, hey, put this in place. So this is the syntax for it, just wrap it in triangle brackets. And then I want you to inject that value into my function, and you have to call it the exact same name. So if it's called name here, it has to be called name here. And what that means is if I call this with Superman, this name variable is going to contain the value, the string Superman, and then I can do whatever I want with it in the function itself, right? So this is still a query parameter version. You can sort of see here, this is the query. I'm querying this endpoint, or this is actually not a query parameter, sorry. This is just in the string itself. But you can think of it as that like the query parameter is like name is equal to Superman. So I'm passing in a key value pair, but I'm doing it via the URL directly. So this is method one. This is what I showed yesterday. Let's comment all this out. The other approach we have is where we say, okay, I've got this endpoint called heroes. And don't worry about what the actual heroes thing is in this implementation. This is just for what I drafted up for the lecture code. For what you use in the project, it's your data store, for example, but won't worry about that. So now here's this alternative situation. I've got this heroes endpoint. And so if you hit this endpoint, what I want to just return all the heroes in the list. So the default behavior when I hit this heroes endpoint is just to get all of the heroes, okay? I don't want it to give me a specific name by default. It is completely valid to just call this endpoint like this and get back all of the heroes in the list. Or, because it's a GET request, I might have some arguments. So for example, I might want the query to be able to support getting a hero via their name, but not always. So I don't want to put it in the actual, query like definition, because it doesn't always have to be used. So how do we do this with Flask? Well, we can just use the request library that comes from Flask. If you remember, from Flask we import the Flask module and the request object, and I can ask, hey, in the request that we're currently processing, right? Are there any arguments, or can you get me the arguments called name? So what I'm saying here is that, I want to see if the query contained a value for the key name. Okay? So now, there might not be. There might not be. In which case, name will just be none. And then what I can say is I've written this cute little one-liner here. It's not the nicest bit of Python ever written. But basically all I'm saying is, if there is something in the name variable, so if the query did contain name in the query parameter, find me the hero via the name. So this is just a local function that I've written here that loops through looking for the name and returns the hero if it finds it. Otherwise, if there was no name provided in the argument, get me back all the heroes in the dictionary. Right? And so these are two sort of ways that we can process data that's coming from the query. Now, if we load up Postman over here to sort of demonstrate this, you can see so by default, I can just hit this heroes endpoint on my local host at port 20,000. When I do that, let me see, am I actually running heroes.py? There we go. So here I have a console CD'd into this heroes directory. I run Python and I run heroes.py. Why has it got two? So here we go now. My server is running at 20,000. I go back to Postman. I will zoom in once. I hit run and we get back the list of the 2 superheroes that I initiated into my list. Now, okay, this is a GET request. So let's say I do want to provide a key value, so a query parameter. How do I do that? I can either, if I know the syntax, this is with Postman specifically. If I know the syntax, I can use the general query parameter syntax. So you use a question mark for the first one. I say the name is equal to, and let's say Superman. And Postman's really cool because it's able to understand the syntax of this query. So this is just your standard, URL syntax. And it actually can pre-populate, it knows that that's a key and that's a name. And that's a value. And when I send that, you can see that, okay, that exact same method was called because it's the same endpoint that I'm calling because I'm doing a GET request at heroes. And I get back the specific heroes because name was not none. So it ran off and it tried to find the hero, turned it into a JavaScript string and returned it back to Postman. Okay? And so that's it. And again, just to clarify for the project, with GET requests, we pass the data via the arguments. So you would use request.args.get and then the key. For anything else, so for post, for example, we use the JSON body to get the entire dictionary object that gets sent alongside the post request. So if you keep that in mind, then that's all you really sort of need to know for the project. So if there's any questions on that, feel free to ask. Someone called Blue Plays mentioned YouTube uses that format or has that format. I think you're referring to this format. This is not, so when I said this is specific to Postman, I meant that Postman can take this and pre-populate this table nicely for us. But this is just the URL format. This happens all over the internet. And if I have multiple key value pairs, I separate them with an ampersand. So then I can say, ID equals 2, for example. And this is everywhere. If you go to any website, I'm just bringing something up in a second. No, I accidentally clicked on an ad. So this is the lecture stream that you're watching right now. If you look at this URL, I don't know how well you can see it. I'll just copy it into code. let's look at this URL. So we have the domain, or the DNS, youtube.com. That's the domain. We have the endpoint /watch. So there's this /watch endpoint that has, that probably controls all the different types of videos and things that we can watch. And then we have a query parameter separator. So we're saying that, hey, when you make this query to YouTube, I want there to be this V key and this random value. And this is like the identifier for the particular video. So this is how YouTube uses URLs and HTTP to provide information on who's viewing what. So yeah, all websites that use HTTP do something like this for GET requests. Now, that's in particular for GET requests. For POST requests, they're usually in the body and you don't get to see it in the URL itself. Okay, any questions on that bit of a recap? Now, another few things I changed just a real little bit. I added this debug equals true when I called app.run. The reason we do this, it's not mandatory, but it just tells Flask that we're debugging our code, we're writing code, and so if I change the code, I'd say super strength with a question, with an exclamation mark. When I save that, if you can see, it automatically restarted my Flask server. So you don't need to bring your server down, bring it back up when you make code changes. So debug, and it does some other little things that make our lives a bit easier. So debug equals true. I really recommend that when you're working on your project, for example, or on your labs that use Flask, you give debug equals true. However, when you submit the final version, you've got to remember to remove it. Okay? But it's debug. There's other ways you can set it that are probably better, like with an environment variable, but this is good enough because you can actually see here what I've done. Otherwise, I've made no other changes. So I just wanted to show that we have a few different options to do this and what we need to use. And I've already pushed this code to the GitLab server. Okay. Any last questions on that? Sorry, Jared, I don't have, yeah. YouTube doesn't let you send links. And I tried to find the option to actually turn that back on. But I don't know where that is. So, sorry, I thought I did try. Anyway. Alrighty, so we're all feeling good to go on to the testing side for today's actual content? Oh, there we go. I found it. It did let you post the URL. Oh, okay. Anyway. So Echoic says, so in this example, /heroes has multiple request types. So let's see, what are you referring to here? So do you mean that it has multiple methods associated with it? So that there's this get type here and there's this post here. Or do you mean that it could have had the request.args or with this method? Yeah, okay. So yeah, that's exactly right. So it's very normal for the same endpoint to have multiple methods associated with it. And you'll be doing that in the project, I'm pretty sure. At least, maybe not in iteration 2, but definitely in iteration 3, I believe. So you can imagine that I might want to add a message to the... let me actually get the spec up. Let's see here. Students, auto groups. So this is the spec for iteration 2. Now you might be right. There might not be any endpoints with the same path but different methods. I can't actually remember off the top of my head. But I mean, if there were, you know how to sort of do that, right? You just have this, you have the route, which might be /heroes or whatever, and then you have this methods equals get, and then down here we have /heroes, but it's a post. So you would just basically, as long as it's in the spec and you know that you have to make it, and if there were multiple, it would just be a second entry into this list, and you would do whatever it has to do. So yeah, it might be for iteration 2 that there's only one method per endpoint, and that would be fine too. So Steve asks, what is request here, a method or an object? Great question. Request is an object. Request comes from Flask, and when you're inside of a Flask request method, so for example here, request gets populated with the data that came from the actual request that's being processed. So for in this case, when heroes get, when a get request to the heroes endpoint is being processed by your server, this is annotating this method, so it will call your get hero method. Inside of this get hero method, request sort of automagically has been populated with the methods and with the properties associated with that particular request. So that's why we can say like, okay, get the name arguments for this request and it can get back Superman or something. So it is an object containing a bunch of different things, all associated with this particular request that's happening, that's being processed right now. If you run a different request has it gets replaced with the properties associated with the post for heroes, for example. So hopefully that answers your question. It is an object. So aims or armies, do all of our arguments come from the link in iteration 2? Absolutely. So the spec specifies what goes into the call and what should come out of the call. Now, but this is what I'm just trying to really clarify into everyone's sort of mind. When I make a get request, you have to just remember this. I think it is listed somewhere. But when you make a get request, the parameters are query arguments. So you would use request.args.get. In anything else, so for example, a post, the parameters are actually going into the body. So it would be request.getJSON. As long as you remember that, then all you need to do is look at the spec. You go, I've got a post here, I've got this here. So you know that I need a post here, and you need, channels create v2 there. And this is what the parameters should be. So let's check that they're there and let's process them. And this is what it should, you go off and do whatever you need to do and then return what's in the return. Okay. Tejas says, I'm not feeling too good. There's a lot to keep up with. I agree. There's a lot to keep up with. I said this yesterday. It's one of these things where you're just going to have to give it some time. That's why we're going over it again for the first half of this lecture. And you will understand it, I promise. Okay. All right. Let's move on. So point being, we've got this Heroes API here with a bunch of different endpoints. And I've just written this Heroes test file. Now, if you think back to any PyTest thing that we do, let's see here. If you think back to any PyTest thing that we do, we call the file something underscore test, right? And we write a bunch of methods, and as long as the methods have the word test either at the start or the end, they will get picked up by PyTest. Okay? Now, the cool thing about this is that I think this is really, really cool. So let's take a second. This endpoint, this Heroes API file, nothing in it, I've not changed anything to support testing. All I've got here is an endpoint that I can use Postman to query, and we're all happy. But now I want to actually write programmatic tests of this endpoint. And just like we always do, we're going to use PyTest to do that. Now, in order to use PyTest, we we need to actually call the API itself. So remember, if you remember back to the lecture yesterday, we demonstrated using Postman to make these queries, right? This is making a HTTP request. The server's receiving it. You can see here it gets logged here, processes the request, and returns back some data, okay? We can also use the web browser. If I go to localhost at port 20,000, and I get all the heroes, I get back a list of all the heroes. Here, my web browser created the HTTP request, right? And we even used curl yesterday via the command line. So what do all these approaches have in common? These are programs, these are computer programs that are able to process and create, well, not to process, to create HTTP requests and process the response. Does that make sense? Whether it be Chrome or curl or Postman, these are just programs that humans have written lots of code for to create these requests. And we can do these, we can make these requests ourselves in Python ourselves. Like, mind blown moment. But we have this requests library that we can import, and we can actually use Python code to create our HTTP requests. So let's break down what we've got in this file. It's a really simple file. There's not much here. I have this import requests module. That's fine. Requests is just a Python library that lets us make HTTP requests. Here I'm specifying the base URL. That kind of makes sense. I'm just assigning it to a variable here. So in Chrome, for example, I have to tell it that I want to go to localhost at port 20,000. That's the base URL. So I need to tell my Python program what the base URL that I'll be navigating to is. I don't even really need to do this. I could just do like that, for example, but just so I don't have to keep retyping that in case I need to change the port or anything, it's just smarter to assign this to a variable, right? So this is the URL or the domain or the IP address and the port that we're making our requests. Actually, another common way I see this is that you go base URL is that, base and then, that way, you get the idea. But we just build the string of the domain and the port that we want to use. All right, let's go to this request here. Let's kick this off. So what have I got here? I've got a method, just a normal method called test get all. Let's call it test get all heroes. Let's be nice and clear. And there's nothing, this isn't anything to do, this doesn't know what's going on. This isn't a Flask method. Semicolon. I don't know what you're referring to. Blue plays. Anyway. So this is just a normal Python method function. Oh, I see. Yes, thank you. Good catch, the colon. This is just a normal Python function. Now, requests is this library that we imported, and it's really simple to make HTTP get requests with this request library. All we do is call this get method on requests. I mean, it's that simple. And I give it the endpoint that I want it to hit. What is the endpoint? It's the base URL, right? So that would be this localhost address with the port 2000. And actually what I should do here is, there we go, it's a bit neater. So it's this base URL, so localhost port 2000 / heroes. And this will actually go off and create a HTTP GET request and return the response, and we just assign that response back to this response variable. That's simple. I mean, it's really cool. We can make a HTTP compliant GET request in one line of Python code. This is why Python is so useful for all this stuff. The libraries are just really easy to use. Okay, this response comes back into some format. And basically what we wanted to do is pass that format or break it down into the actual data that came back. And the way we do that is by calling this .json method that exists on all request response objects. So response here contains all the different components and aspects that come with a HTTP request response. So it's got any cookies that were set, what's the encoding, what are the headers. It's got a bunch of different things in it. What we want to get is the actual data that got returned in the form of the JSON. So that means we call .json, okay? And what that means is this response data variable that I just defined, basically, because we called /all heroes, right? So let's go back to Postman. If I call /heroes, I get back the two heroes, Superman and Wonder Woman. Calling .json gets us back this information. Oops. Does that make sense? So it gets the actual JSON object that gets returned in the response. And it just gets rid of all the other different things that can be set. Any cookies, all the different headers that get set, anything like that. So it just gets back the actual object. Once we've got that data back from this request, well, we just do whatever we want to do with it. We just do our normal PyTest assertions. So let's actually have a look at what, let's have a look at what's going on here. We have an array, in this case, with two objects, one with Superman and one with Wonder Woman. So if I know that I'm getting all the heroes, I want to test that this function works. So what should I test? Well, I want to test that, for example, the first object in the array, its ID is 0, and its name is Superman. And that's just because I know that's what it should be. So on the right-hand side, we have our expected data, and on the left-hand side, we have what we got back from the request. Let's comment out this function and run in another terminal here, PyTest in the current directory, and it's going to go off, and here we go, our tests passed. The heroes.test file is picked up, and this test passed. So this means our first, the ID was 0, and the name was Superman. If I put Wonder Woman, and I ran that, you can see our test fails, because it expected it to be Wonder Woman, but it was actually Superman. But the actual assertion itself, at the point that we do the assertions, we have, no idea that we did a HTTP request. We just have some data and we want to compare it. Okay? Let's put this back to Superman. Now, another thing that's really useful to do here, this is what I wanted. So this is just looking at the data that comes back via this response.json. But if you remember, when we do a HTTP request, we get back the status code. So the server tells us, yes, this request was processed successfully, or this request was not processed successfully. And we can actually test for that. So we can say that I want to assert that the response's status code, right? This is the response. So go off, do your GET request to heroes, and I want to assert that it went okay and we got a 200 status code back. And then, if that goes okay, I want to go off, get the data, and check the first one was Superman. If I run that now, we should get all of our tests passing as well, because it was a status code of 200. if I change this, or I want the status code to be 404, well, this test is going to fail because it was a 200 result. I don't know if I'm repeating myself too much here, but basically we can sort of test anything about these requests that we make by just looking at what we expect and what we get back. So I've written a comment here, well, what's missing? Well, another valid thing to do would be, well, that only tests that Superman is there, so let's also test that Wonder Woman is the second thing in the results. Let's test that, and hopefully this all passes as well. That all passes. Well, what's something else we might test? Well, we might want to test that the length of response data is equal to 2. So I know that all my heroes should just have 2 heroes, Superman and Wonder Woman. So I just want to assert that is the case. And now if I get back a third superhero, this would actually fail, which is correct because I only know that there should be 2 heroes that get returned. Cool? Do we have any questions on any of this so far? Oops. Is chat dead, or is everyone happy? Is everyone not happy? Jared's happy, that's good. Cool, people are happy. All right, good. Someone's scared and happy, that's good. Not unhappy. Yeah. Happy with the content, I suppose. Okay, Williams says, can we create a new hero in the test? That is a great point, and I was actually going to say, can we come up with some ideas for some new tests that we want to do? So this is a really good one. So this is just testing that we have all the heroes that we expect when we call get heroes. But we can do something with our HTTP tests and then check that what we did, is what we wanted it to do. So let's do that. Let's call, so I had just an idea here, but let's do this. So create new hero. Yep. And then let's first of all go to our actual API here. So how do we add a new hero? Well, what I'm going to be looking for is a post, because posting is how we post new data, right? And here we can see here that if I hit the /heroes endpoint with the post method, it will actually create a hero using the requests get JSON. Give me one sec, guys. I just need to turn something on. Okay. Sorry, when I stream, the computer gets so hot and I need to turn the air conditioner on. All right, so if we hit /heroes with a post, if I give it some body, JavaScript body, it will create me a new hero. And the thing I need to give it is a name and a power. So let's, first of all, before we write any code, let's do it in Postman and make sure that we're using the API correctly. So if I go to /heroes, that's fine, but I want to do a post, okay, and I want to give it a body, because I need to give it the name and the power of the superhero that I'm posting. So it's always a JavaScript object, which looks a lot like a Python dictionary. So we have our curly braces, the name. Now, this is very important. I need the name and the superpower of our new hero. Keep it all, keep it safe for work, please. Oh yeah, and good point, it should be called test, create new hero. Yeah, good point. Just so it gets picked up on PyTest. Okay, I like that. Crazy Dave. And the power. Sentient plants. Well, let's go can talk to plants. Is that what you meant? That's good enough for me. Okay, so if we make a post request to heroes with this data, and I think that all looks good, I click send, and that worked correctly. So when you post a new hero here, what I actually do is return that hero that just got appended, just so that the requester knows that it went through okay. All right, so that's how we call the make the request. Now we need to use requests to do this for us. So really easily, we're always going to have a response, and we're always going to make a request, and it's not going to be .get, or what's it going to be? Is Crazy Dave a real thing? Oh God. Come on, guys. I want the... If we use .get to make a GET request, what do we use to make a POST request? Everyone who's watching this after the lecture runs is probably going nuts because they're like, can't see the chat and dying. Yeah, it's .post, yeah. Oh, I do remember Crazy Dave. He's from Plants vs. Zombies. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, cool. Anyway, okay, we're getting off track. All right, we want to make a post. Oh, it's requests with an S, not with no S. I want to make a post now. What's the string that we're going to use? Well, it's going to be the base URL, and it's going to be /heroes, just the same, but we're making a post request here. So it's going to be navigated to this different endpoint here from the other test we wrote. Now, we need to give it the body, the JavaScript body. How do we do that? Well, we can just basically give it a parameter to this post call, and we say, well, the JSON is going to be equal to an object, and in that object, it's going to be, this data here, basically. Well, actually, just these two. I don't know what this is going to do to the formatting. Let's clean that up. Okay, let's format that a little bit. So we're going to post a request to heroes, and this is the data that I want to post it. Now, that's going to do that post, but we need to check that that worked correctly. What's the obvious way to determine if a response occurred correctly? Well, we can just check the status code of it. Right? Let's do this. Let's run this. Okay, something failed, so let's see what's going on here. I see. Okay. If you remember back, we wrote a pretty bad test that just checked that there were only 2 heroes in the list when we get all the heroes, but now we've been adding heroes, right? So let's just comment that out. So we're not going to check that there are only 2, because now there are 4 and there's soon going to be 5, because we're not clearing the heroes in our list, and that worked 100%. Now what we can do is we can go to Postman, for example. We can get all the heroes, so that we're not going to give it a body, and you can see here that I think we ran it twice. So we've got our Crazy Dave that got added twice. Pretty cool. You can take it further. You could then test, assert that the name returned was Crazy Dave. Like, you can't just do this. You can't just trust that if the server threw a 200 OK result, then everything worked correctly. So what would you have to do if you tested that you added a new hero? Well, you might want to return back, you might want to check the actual response.json. You might want to check the list of actually increased. And here's another really interesting thing that we often have to do. So I've added a new hero. I check that that hero gets added by checking back the data I get back, and it's all looking okay. But how do I really know that that hero was added? Well, I might need to make, you know, another get request to heroes and check that there's actually a new hero in my list. So I can make multiple requests, and I actually, in many tests, we should make multiple requests to test that, like if I add a hero, and now if I get all the heroes, is that new hero the last hero on the list, for example? So you can make multiple requests and then just more assertions after that request. In the testing methods. Okay, so Zach wrote, what does .post do exactly? Well, .post on the requests module really simply makes a HTTP post request, just like .get makes a HTTP get request. Just like when I go to Postman, if I select get and I hit this endpoint, this makes a HTTP get request. If I change it to post now, it's going to make a post request and probably give me an error because I didn't give it any data to post. So it's just telling the Python library, the requests library, which type of HTTP method to use when it makes the request. So it just very simply goes off and posts some data to that endpoint. So Stephen asks, how do we catch an error raised? So for example, if the user did not give a first name. So great question. Sometimes we want to test that incorrect usage of an API gives us back an error. All right, that is valid. So when I posted to heroes without any data, you can actually see that my server gave us a 500 internal server error message. Well, that's the code that it gave back to us. Now that makes a lot of sense. If we go to our server and we go to heroes, we go to post, what we do here is we say, get the JSON, put it into request data, and then get the name. But there was no name, right? Because I gave it no data. So Python crashed, but actually Flask was smart enough to, before it crashed, or it didn't actually crash the server's probably still running. So Flask actually caught the error, processed the response, giving it back a 500 error, internal server error, and then kept the server running. It was nice enough to do that. So what we can do if we're testing something that we know should fail, now in this case, we should just write better code so that it doesn't crash. But very simply, I mean, I can do this just to sort of demonstrate. Def test underscore post bad hero, right? And I make a, let's do it like this. I make a post to slash heroes, but in the JSON, I'm not giving it anything. Now, do I think this is going to return a 200 OK error, return code? It's not going to. We know the server is going to throw a 500 error. So I can say that if I post with no data, I don't think that's going to work, right? And when I run that, this should actually pass. Makes sense, right? Because I said this should not work. .500 is the internal error server error code. But that could change, right? Like I could try and, you can imagine that if I tried to get a hero that didn't exist, it might return a 404 because that means it can't find it. But you can put whatever error code you need to and assert that it's true. What you can't do here, So this is important. What you can't do here is use PyTest raises. Because even if if you look here, an error was thrown here, but this is happening on the server. This code is running on some other computer, potentially. So it can't catch the Python error. All it can do is make a request, over here. All it can do is make a request and check the response code, the status code. In this case, I actually want to check that it's not 200. And this is the way we just make a series of assertions. But you're not going to do like raises, that you raise an input error or an exception or something like that, because this code is not failing. This code made a post request and the server crashed, but this code didn't. So Steve asks, is this the same thing when we see the web return 404? Absolutely. What is 404 is the agreed upon code for not found. So basically, if you look at, if we go to our heroes here, let's delete, where's get? Here we go. Get heroes, and we get a name here, and we're finding the hero by the name. I mean, I haven't done this here, but you can imagine here that I can actually tell Flask to return a 404 error here. Because it wasn't able to find this particular resource. Cool. So some more questions. Okay. Do we only check the response code for exceptions? Yes and no, it depends. It depends if data comes back alongside the error, then sometimes you can check that the data that came back is still what you expect. It depends on the nature of the error, but it's all specified in the spec. Cool. So Julia asks a great question, actually. What happens if we don't return anything? What a good question, I gotta say. That means you're really thinking about this stuff. I really, really like that. Okay, this is interesting. And I'll demonstrate it so you're not just taking my word for it. If all of these things that we're doing return some data that we're processing, but many times we don't actually need to return anything. We just need to go and do something. I had an example, I think I got rid of it, but let's just make something. Let's just do it. Let's actually make an endpoint called do nothing. And it's a get request. Let's make it a post. And it has a method called do nothing. And it makes a variable and assigns true to the variable, and then that's it. It doesn't do anything. So what do we think is going to happen here? Now my server automatically got restarted because I'm in debug mode. So this do nothing endpoint should exist. So how do we test endpoints? We can go to Postman. Postman is nice because it lets us explore everything that comes back. So, I want to use the do nothing endpoint. I'm doing a post request. That's correct. I'm not posting in any data though, and there's no parameters. I hit send. No, we shouldn't have got a 500 error. Okay, yes we did, that's fine. Basically, Flask is giving us the error here, but the view function did not return a valid response. The function either returned none or ended without a return statement. So why is it telling us that this was a crash? Because even if you call an API and you call something that just goes off and does something, the API should always, it always makes a response. It has to make a response. The server, when you visit a website, you make a HTTP query, There's a request and there's always a response. What Flask is telling us here is that, hey, you didn't tell me any information that I should put into this response. Because if you think about it, we have a 500 server error. What does that mean? That means that at some point, Flask actually did make a response. Do you guys agree? The response included 500, but it made a response on its own. Do you guys agree with that statement? Even though I did nothing, I returned nothing, Flask still made a response. But what it's telling us is that I have no idea what I should put in that response. So it's telling you you should do something. In this case, you could even just return X. That you get this true thing, or you can let's see here. What a really common thing you can do is, you can return, this is what you would probably actually do. So from Flask, we can import this response object. Now we do nothing here, but we still, even though we're doing nothing, return a response. And the response might have a status of 200. Now, you never actually have an endpoint that does nothing, right? So like this x equals true was just to show that we went off and did something, but I have no idea about it or how it went. Does that make sense? But I don't want to return anything about it. I just went off and did something. So what I can just say is that I can make a new response, a Flask response. I can tell it things that I want, and I want it to return 200. If I go to Flask now and test that, okay, beautiful. We get a 200 response code. What this means is that the endpoint did what it was supposed to do. No errors were thrown, and we returned a 200 status code, right? This is about as minimal as you can get, but you got to return something. Another common thing that you'll see gets done is that you just return an empty dictionary. You'll see this all the time. Why do we do this? Well, if we return an empty dictionary, it's not much data that's being transmitted, and we get a 200 status code because we're returning something and we're happy. So yeah, anytime you you have to return something from a HTTP endpoint. That's because anytime a request is made, there should always be a response. Unless the server goes down, there is always a response. It's whether or not your endpoint or your server knows what should go into that response. Yeah, that's a great point, Hamish. Python doesn't have to return something. I can have a method that doesn't return anything, but a HTTP request should always have a response. Yeah, that's a good point, Hamish. You could also, yeah, that's right. Well, when you return your own response that you can build, you can, you can give it any status you want here. So let's come up with a list. Here's the list of HTTP statuses. Some of these are really common. Some of these you'll never have heard of. I saw some of you talking about the teapot. Is that going to be in this list here? The teapot one, 418. I am a teapot. It was introduced as an April Fool's joke in 1998. But if you return the status code 418, that literally is meant to be interpreted as the server saying that it is a teapot. So we can do that. We can call it teapot. So if you post to teapot, we should get back the 418 code. I am a teapot. And it's pretty cool because I never all I did was return 418. It's what's this called? It's Postman that knows 418 means I'm a teapot. Yeah, and then 204 is what we were just talking about then. And that basically means nothing went wrong. It's something like that. Yeah, nothing went wrong. It successfully processed the request, but there's no content to come back. So actually, great. This is what we should have done here. Cool. Oh, it's 3:06. Oh, that's fine. Yeah. Yeah, we saw it too, right? Cool. All right, 204 is very common. Like 404, yep. So input error is a Python exception type. So there's probably something similar to input error here, but this is the full list of HTTP status return codes. So yeah, there is no input error, because input error is when you call a function with an input that causes an error or that's invalid, and that doesn't really make sense here. Do you return 500 when the value given is invalid? So no, 500 is just the most generic internal server error. If you hit a 5xx error, that's not good. That means your request did something that actually caused the server to crash. Usually. I mean, there's variants having bad gateway not implemented. That's okay. But if you get 500 in particular, because that means that the developer likely, you don't typically write code. I don't think you would ever do this. You shouldn't ever do this. You should never write an endpoint that intentionally throws 500, because 500 means I've got no idea what went wrong. So if you're getting back a 500 internal server error, that means that the server is broken. It's literally broken. So you don't want to ever return 500 errors intentionally. And if you're using the internet, you come across a server and you're seeing 500, that's pretty bad. But yeah, 501, for example, could be like, I've got this endpoint. I know in the future it's going to do something, but right now it doesn't, but I still want the endpoint to be there for some reason. You can have 501 not implemented. So yeah, you could do that for all your, I mean, you could do that for your project. I mean, there's heaps of content status errors for your perusal. Okay. So Blue Plays asks, are all the functions meant to be endpoints? And the answer is sort of yes and no. What I'm trying to... Let me get up the backend. Iteration 2. When you go to the specification for iteration 2, all of these interface specifications now are endpoints. These are not, I mean, it makes sense. It says the HTTP method here. These are all endpoints now. To be honest, we really don't care how many functions you make. Well, we care in terms that you've got to do things nicely. But we're not testing for the functions you write in Python now. What we are now testing is the endpoints. The specification is only for the endpoints. They all have these post get, put associated with them. So it's 3:10. That's actually all the content I had today, but there's a few other things to mention, and there's one of the reasons why this lecture is a bit shorter. Number one, if you go to the playlist for the lecture content, I'm getting that up here. We view the full playlist. You will see that we released, where was it? Here. No. Here. This video in the playlist, let me link to the playlist. This is the video that introduces iteration 2. It goes for an hour. It's the same project as last term. So to not duplicate our efforts, it's the same recording as last term. That's why it's Hayden giving the video who made the video. Basically, he will take you through the entire project, the specification, even how to get started with using the front end with the iteration 2 backend and all of that. So all of that exists in this video. It's now been added to the playlist. So even though this lecture is not gone for the full 2 hours, there's an hour-long video that you really should watch. So I just wanted to cut down this lecture so that we won't just giving you an extra hour requirement. I know some people really do time manage their time really closely, so this lets you have that opportunity to watch that video. So please watch the iteration 2 video. I said this yesterday, I'm going to say it again. A lot of you did amazingly in iteration 1. I'm really, really proud. Some of you are disappointed, you want to do better. I understand too. The best way to do better, you're all such capable students, so the best way to do better is just to get started on the iteration 2 now. There's nothing that you guys aren't capable of understanding. I think what let some of you down in iteration 1 was just how quick you got on top of it. Now, not all of that was your fault necessarily. There was it's been a crazy term with the floods and COVID. You've seen all my announcements going out and stuff. So that's why we lowered the weighting of the project in general by 5% compared to last term. And iteration 1 is worth a really small percentage of your final mark. So iteration 2 is worth a lot more. So I want you guys to do really well. So please watch iteration 2 video ASAP. Make sure everyone in your group watches it. Don't just delegate it to one person. And get started on iteration 2 now. You know all the concepts needed to really get started with it. And when you get stuck, you've got the forum, you've got your tutor, you've got a few weeks, so you'll make a lot of progress on it. So please get started with iteration 2 now. Otherwise, if there are no more questions, please fill the lecture feedback form that's pinned to the chat if you have any feedback. And I think that's everything I needed to talk about today. Was there any more questions on what we spoke about in terms of testing our HTTP endpoints? I might even push... Do you want to push this code as it is now? Is that better than what it was? I think it might be. I think it might be. Oh yeah, all of this code is it's been available the whole time. So if you go to GitLab, so if you go to WebCMS, you can get it from GitLab. 22T1 lectures in the coursework, lecture code. There's a link there, and this has every week's lecture code for the whole week. 4.2 heroes. That's what we've been working with today. So all the code's here. You can take it down, you can run it, you can play around with it. That's the best way to learn about these things. Oh, before we go, someone asked me in the lecture feedback, how do you run a Python server from another directory? It's really, really simple. So right now I'm in the heroes directory that has heroes test, for example, and the heroes server itself. But let's say I'm in another directory. I just call the file. So I just go python heroes/heroes.py. And it's probably, I close the server. And then it just starts the server. It's that simple. It's that simple. So you just run the Python file from anywhere. Cool. Alrighty. Well, if there's any, I'm going to take it that there's no more questions. So I'm going to start playing you off a little bit. Put a bit of music on. But you can, I'll stay around for 5 more minutes if there are any questions, but otherwise, if you're all happy, or not unhappy, as you put it, go and watch the iteration 2 video if you haven't already. And if you have already, good work. You know, make good use of your time, I guess. Thank you everyone for coming. And if you're watching the video after the fact, thank you for watching it. And I'll see you on the forum. Yeah, the lecture's over. The lecture's over. We pre-recorded 2 videos this week, so I'm giving you the time to watch the videos. Okay, Yufan says, can you show us again how to use Postman with VLAB? Okay, I can. So here is my VLAB. You can see this, yep. In Chrome, you go to this URL. Now, where do you get this URL from? You can just Google Postman Chrome extension. It's the first link. For you, there'll be a button that says install. Mine says launch because I already installed it. We click launch and it opens Postman. And then it's exactly the same. So I've got, I mean, yeah, I don't really need to go into it any further. Here is a Flask server running. This is the lecture code itself. And I just make, you know, it's the exact same as the desktop client. Does that answer your question, Yufan? It's really simple. I've also put, let's see here. I've also put a post on the forum with the details. Cool. Yeah, Ferron, all the videos, any video we release is in this playlist. So you can see there's the 4.1 lecture that was pre-recorded, and there is the iteration 2, it's playing it. I probably shouldn't play it. Use my bandwidth. And there is the iteration 2 video that introduces the project 2. So right now, I guess, if you've got the next 40 minutes, or I guess an hour, the lecture is continuing, sort of. Just go and watch this video. Cool. Alrighty. Any other things that I missed? No, I don't think so. Have a great day, everyone. Stay safe, stay dry. I hope you saw my announcements on the forum regarding the weather and the tutorials and stuff. So we're just trying to adapt and work with you. Time to watch the iteration 2 video on 1.5 speed. As long as you understand it. As long as you understand it. Hamish, just out of curiosity, why are we not putting the iteration 2 JavaScript web tokens in the headers? Where do we put them actually? Let's see here. Let's go to a group. Yeah, the lecture's finished, everyone. Unless you got questions, you can go. How do we tell you to send them, Hamish? Let's see. I think we give it a session ID, right? Yeah, because it's not storing the password, so we can, I think. Right? It's just the session. So it doesn't store the password. So if it was the authentication token, then that would be concerning. We pass the token with every request. But the token, it's not the authentication token that we pass, isn't it? Oh, it is. Yeah, this is something that we've come across with in the project I worked on too. We had a debate about it. Or I guess not for posts, it's just for gets, right? I guess it probably should be in the headers, which we don't actually cover in this, like we don't talk about the headers specifically. But, yeah, it is better, isn't it? But the data still has to be transmitted, whether it's in the query or the body. But yeah, good point, maybe. Maybe some feedback for the next project that gets written. Yeah, it's the logs. That's right. That's the problem with it. Yeah, I agree. I agree with you, Hamish. Yeah, not sure why it was done like this. I didn't write the project, unfortunately. We do talk about authentication in the lecture later on. So I think I actually do mention it, that it's not ideal. So yeah, this is the error. This is the concern here, that we do it in GET requests. Tan says, when I run the local host of the lecture code, it says this page can't be reached. I don't know exactly what you mean there. Do you, what do you mean exactly? When you run the lecture code itself, does the server not start? Or what's going on? While Tan answers that, it's a good point, Hamish. We just recently, in the last year, in the project that I work on, moved all the authentication tokens from the header to, from the query parameter to the header. Yeah. So it says this page can't be reached. Oh, like, do you mean the actual GitLab for the code? So, or when you might need to post on the forum, sorry, Tan. Make sure you've set the port correctly. No, we moved it to the header, Hamish. We moved it to the header. We fixed it. And the code was written a long time ago. This is how it was. I don't think I might be being naive here, or some form of like biased, but I don't think it's the biggest issue in the world. It's not good, granted, but like, even if it's in the header, it's still being transmitted in the request, right? Disregarding if it's in the query parameter, it's just for logging, and our system was careful with it. So we stripped out all of the query parameters from the logs, I think, or just the token ones. And it was a very controlled server that we only ran the server and things like that. But it's still being transmitted whether or not it's in the header or the query. But maybe it gets to headers get encrypted. Is that why it's better as well? Anyway. Yeah, Tan, I'm sorry, I don't quite... You're going to just have to post on the forum with a screenshot of what's going wrong. Yeah, post in the forum. Yeah, this was all API requests. And so is this. This is all API requests, right? Oh, see you, Steve. Yeah, but, so now I'm just talking to Hamish, but yeah, no, it never keeps the auth token in the query. So we were SPA. So the query parameter was no query parameters were ever in the actual URL. They were just in the requests made by the app. Does that make sense? So they were sent via the query parameters, but that was never visible to the user. So they could never copy it in our case. This might be doing something similar, actually. So yeah, it's not as bad. It's not ideal probably, but it's not as bad as it could be. It's the only issue could be logging for this, but yeah, we live and we learn. Anyway, I'm going to head off. Thank you everyone again if you've stuck around. If it's just Hamish, it's just Hamish. So cool. Have a good week, everyone.